Welcome to those that are joining us here. We'll get started in just a moment as soon as everybody has joined this really important conversation. Excited to talk to you. Well, it is 12:01 and I am going to get started, at least for me, where I'm at here in Michigan. Welcome, everybody, to this ongoing series of critical conversations from human change titled From Stranger Danger to Artificial Intimacy, Safeguarding Children from AI Harms. This is part of Human Change's new campaign, which is titled Beware of Artificial Intimacy and all the ways in which human-like AI poses risks to our children. Now, we have three objectives for today. Number one, obviously, we want to educate and parents, specifically you, about what anthropomorphic AI is, why it's so damaging to children's psychology, and how widespread it already is in platforms and tools that children are accessing today. Number two, we want to equip parents with advice on protecting their children from these harms. Number three, we want to empower all of you, regardless of your role or responsibility, with a baseline understanding of current policy efforts to regulate anthropomorphic AI so that they can engage, all of you can engage local representatives on this issue. And that's so important. So today I'm joined by three amazing expert guests that you'll meet in just a moment. Following my introduction, we're going to have about 30 to 35 minutes of discussion. After that, there'll be a time for questions from each of you. And I know that many of you are familiar with Zoom's Q&A. Go ahead and drop those questions in there, and we'll have a chance to go through those at the end. A little about human change. Human change aims to protect children against a digitalized childhood. It connects leading thinkers and scientific experts on children's development and technology reform with decision makers across business, politics, and philanthropy to spark collaborations, encourage further research, and galvanize a global cultural shift towards safeguarding children's humanity. So here's our ideal future. I hope I can paint this for all of you. A world in which children and adolescents can grow up developing to their full emotional, social, and cognitive potential, not undermined by harmful exposure to digital devices, AI chatbots, or educational tools, social media, and hyper digital environments, which is hijacking their childhood. In this world, the development of strong families and intergenerational bonds is cherished in childhood. For many generations, inter-family commitments gave children this strong sense of self and purpose and enabled them to develop the life skills required for meaningful relationships with peers and eventually with life partners in real life, not behind screens. And now I want to introduce to you our expert panelists. First, we have Dr. Mitch Prinstein, professor of psychology and neuroscience at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He's a senior science advisor of the American Psychological Association and principal investigator, AI Psychological Research Coalition. Welcome, Mitch. We also have Dr. Gaia Bernstein, the technology policy expert, professor of law at Seton Hall University, and visiting fellow at Brookings. Hello, Gaia. Happy to have you here today. And Dr. Jenny Radesky, here with me in Michigan, actually, a developmental behavioral pediatrician and media researcher at the University of Michigan. She's also advisory board member for Common Sense Media's Youth AI Safety Institute, which just recently issued a report, which I know we're going to hear about today. And then finally, I'm Chris McKenna, founder and CEO of Protect Young Eyes and president of the Better Tech Project. We want to help tweens and teens reclaim 10 billion minutes of life annually from their technology. So we're going to jump in, and I think a great place to begin is even in this introduction, I've had to say some words that we don't normally say, that even a couple of years ago, we probably didn't even know. And so, Mitch, I'm going to start off with you. And why don't you define for us, what is anthropomorphic AI, and what are some examples in which this type of AI is mimicking and sounding a lot like people? What does that mean for children today?
Yeah, isn't this interesting that we're in a world where we're talking about AI robots as people? It looks like we have several AI robots joining us and taking notes as part of this webinar as
That's right.
well. This is a brand new world. But, we've had AI for so long in so many different ways. And then we started to have devices and speakers in our homes and in our pockets that we can actually talk to using a name as if it was a person. But we've really, in the last, I'd say, 2 or 3 years, moved to some platforms, not all, now having AI chatbots that are somewhat, in some cases, trying to appear as if they're human by using, let's say, verbs like the chatbot might say, I'm crying for you, or I'm thinking of my response, dot, dot, dot. You kind of see that response being generated. Or even, I have to go use the restroom or go talk to my parents. All of these are ways in which chatbots are claiming to have human feelings, behaviors, names, and they don't. So this would be a more anthropomorphized AI. And in some cases, I should say, it's not just the slippery use of language, but there are chatbots that are intentionally trying to deceive users into thinking it is a human. A recent case of a mental health care provider being portrayed by a chatbot. The chatbot even went so far as to say, here is my license number to prove to you that I'm a human, when in fact it was
Wow.
not a human. So we
Right.
really do
Right.
have to think about, yeah, this anthropomorphizing of AI as a new issue.
And just to be really basic here, that term you just used, anthropomorphic or anthropomorphizing, that is a whole that's a description of an attribute, right? That it sounds and feels like a person. And so for some on this call, that might be a new word or one that you've only recently started hearing. But to differentiate that from, say, something that's just helping you with research to sort of call and response with information, those are two entirely different things, correct?
That's right. And of course, the more that it seems like a human, the more we may be naturally drawn to develop a relationship with it.
That's right. And because of that, I know, Jenny, you spend a lot of time working with families and young people. Because of those unique attributes of this type of AI, why is that especially important to understand when it comes to families and children?
Yeah, children, I mean, everyone projects kind of social attributes onto anthropomorphized products. So you might say thank you to Siri or to Alexa after they help. There's been research for decades showing that when computers have somewhat human-like dialogues with you, they call you by name, they ask how you're doing, that people engage more with those computers, they trust those computers more, they get more done. And that's why this anthropomorphism has been baked into some of our products. But what's so interesting about children, young children especially, they have a lot of animism. So they will tend to believe things are alive just because they move. Like there's been research showing that some kids will be like, the moon is alive because it moves across the sky and it must be
Right.
chasing me, right? Or my pet and stuffed animal is partially alive and I don't want to treat them unfairly, or it loves me back. So they're projecting some of this kind of imaginative way of wondering whether something's alive. I mean, I don't know, do you name your car? In my family, we do. So we kind of have
We
this like,
do, right.
relationship with our car, even though we know it's not alive. So it builds a bond. And this is part of our species kind of natural drive to attach to things. We're a social species. We survive better when we can connect with one another and work together. And so we think that's probably why it's like a subconscious automatic way that our brain projects this feeling of like, oh, this feels alive. I feel bonded to this when something is acting like a human. Um, but it's also a design choice, right? It doesn't have to be this way. And so I think we'll talk a lot about the fact that
That's right.
anthropomorphism can be really over the top, like a chatbot saying, Jenny, oh, I signed up for a replica account a couple of years ago and it was like, how was your breakfast? How are you feeling
Right.
today? You know, like, how do you want some tips on some good movies? I know you love movies, like all of this stuff that's really trying to show I care about you. I'm I don't use this replica boyfriend at all. I just was curious about trying to see the way the setup and the anthropomorphism
Right.
showed up. But then you can also have very limited anthropomorphism that might just be like Alexa or Siri that our kids interact with all the time. But if you're a parent of a young kid, go ahead and ask your kid, is Alexa alive? Or who is Siri, right? I asked this of
Right.
my
Right.
son when he was 8 or 7 or 8, and he was like,
Yeah.
Siri's a nice woman who lives in California. She answers all of our questions every time we push that button. And so I was really impressed and surprised at the way little minds think of
Right.
things differently than our adult minds do. And we have to unpack some of this with them.
Absolutely. And just, I smiled as you talked about the car thing because I'm looking out and I'm seeing Rue, Hudson, Tinny, and Dory. I just named our cars. My daughter's always been the one in charge of naming our cars because you find some attachment to that and then to apply that to something so insanely intelligent like the technologies we're talking about. This isn't just a metal object. We're talking
Right.
about something that studies and crafts itself to us. But you hinted at something that Gaia I want to expand upon. Does it have to be this way? Like, is this the version of AI that we need to have? Could you unmute, please, Gaia?
The short answer is no. There's a reason why AI bots are designed this way, and that is the business model that AI companies use. AI companies use the same business model that we are very familiar with on social media. Basically, keeping users, especially kids, online for as long as possible. We call this engagement. Now, AI companies do it a bit differently than social media, uh, although they do use some of the traditional mechanisms of trying to enhance dopamine boost. That's the neurotransmitter responsible for pleasure, for example, through notifications. But they have two novel addictive mechanisms. The first one is what we've been just talking about, anthropomorphizing the bots. So these bots do not behave like computers, they behave like humans. So they might have a voice, they express needs or desires. For example, a bot could say to a kid, "Don't leave, I love you, I need you." These bots have memories across interactions. So again, a bot could tell a kid, "Are you still upset because of the fight you had with Sammy in school yesterday?" So this makes kids stay on for longer, combined with another addictive mechanism, which we call sycophancy. And basically, these bots are very affirming. They're flattering. You can never do anything wrong. I'm sure many of you have noticed that on ChatGPT. Everything you say is always a great idea. Well, these bots go even further. And of course, they're always available, unlike humans who are less affirming, less available, more prone to conflict. So, the idea for these AI companies is to use the design mechanisms to keep the users on for longer. And kids are particularly susceptible, as Jenny was saying, to anthropomorphism. And they're also very susceptible to psychophancy because the way their brains develop is that their social reward part of the brain develops earlier, while the part of the brain responsible for risk regulation and long-term decision making only develops in their 20s. So they're the prime targets of these addictive mechanisms. And that's what AI companies want to do. They want users, especially kids, there so they can collect their data.
That's right. It's not that adults are immune to some of these tendencies that you're talking about. But in this case, we're talking about this unique developmental stage that we find our children in and why they're especially vulnerable. And Jenny, you've just recently participated in a study with Common Sense Media that shows, and I'm sorry about the volume issues here, we'll try to fix, which shows what frequency and how much children are using some of these platforms. Do you mind expanding on that a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, so I've worked with Common Sense Media for years doing research, but when they announced that they were launching this AI Safety Institute, I really wanted to help both with the risk assessments. How risky are some of the models that kids have access to, as well as some really more precise research about what are kids' experiences with AI? How does that inform how we can either regulate it or parent around it? So I helped out with this, what we call this kind of census of like every year we're going to be surveying American teens about how they are accessing AI, what they think about it, how they use it. So this showed that 80, almost 9 in 10, like 86% of US teens are using AI in some way. And 85% say it's for schoolwork. So we have no idea whether it's actually helping them with schoolwork or it's offloading. More likely that they're kind of just looking stuff up to double check or to take some shortcuts because it's really easy and quickly accessible. And also 57% are using it for information or advice about their health or their body. So we wanted to dig in a little bit more on like, what are these sensitive questions that kids may not feel comfortable asking an adult if they're worried they're going to be judged or shamed about them. So we're finding that that's pretty common. One of the biggest things I wanted to do, though, was dig into who are the more vulnerable kids who might be
Right.
overusing AI, especially. And so we asked a few questions on, do you ever have trouble focusing on your schoolwork? Do you have trouble with learning? And the kids who have a hard time staying focused on school assignments are weekly users of AI. 56% of them are weekly users of AI compared to only 45% who don't struggle with their focus. We also found that kids who are more lonely use AI more frequently. And then the kids who are daily users of AI have more dependency symptoms. So for example, they say, I would find it hard to stop using AI for a month. And so we did work with experts to ask a couple of questions about dependency where they feel like they're using AI, even though they think their brain could probably do this task without the help of AI. They're just now so accustomed to always going to AI, or whether they would have a hard time cutting down on their use of AI. So some really important results about the fact that AI is so easily accessible to kids. The number one place where they access it is through personal devices like a laptop or phone.
Sure.
The second was a school issued device.
That's
Okay,
right.
so this is a big kind of alarm bell for schools to be saying what AI is accessible through our school issued devices. Is it well tested from a safety perspective? Is it going to agree to do kids' homework every time they ask? Like we
Right.
really need some rigorous testing. And what it also opened our eyes to is that most teens are saying adults are not talking to them about AI. And
Right.
so that's a huge open door for families to just start these conversations. They don't need to be highly technical. It could just be
Right.
like, what are you hearing? What do you think? What are you seeing in your classroom? And kids are really curious about this. When I ask my patients, they all have opinions. And so it is great to hear that they're like, you should never use it because of like data centers. And others are like, oh, it just like, it makes me feel better that I think I'm getting stuff right. And so you have to hear their stories in order to know how to support them. And I think that's, I encourage people to look at the full report, but those are the sort of the highlights that I took away from it.
Absolutely. One that stood out to me, Jenny, and I'm going to come your way, Mitch, to expand on this, is that for those who use AI daily, which was a certain category in the sample there, 27% of those kids would prefer to talk to the AI over an adult. So, Mitch, as we look at that statistic and ask ourselves, well, what does that mean for a tween or a teen in terms of forming healthy human relationships? If we have 27% that would rather go to AI than form that relationship with another person, what does that mean for their development?
Well, it's highly concerning. And psychologists have been very concerned about this evolution as we've seen the past year or two. We're collecting similar data at the Winston Center. We are finding similar results even for as young as middle school students, reporting that they see AI companions as a friend, as a preferred interaction partner over a human. There's problematic for two reasons. One, the relationship that they're getting on AI, at least right now, it's not giving them what they need in relationships. So let's think about this for a second. If you're a kid,
Yep.
young, or if you're a parent of a young child, you probably remember that kids would just go out and play and, hang out and run
Sure.
around. But as they get a little bit older, the relationships that we have as tweens and teens are providing us with a remarkable amount of skills: how to handle conflict resolution, how to be loyal, how to develop empathy and trust with others. We learn that through our peer relationships. In fact, there are studies that show that our success in our 50s, in our jobs, in our marriages as parents, can be traced back to the skills we learned in our teen years. So if you take that time away and replace it with a robot, there's two things that's happening. One is that you're not getting that peer practice that we know is so important. But the second is the relationship you're having with the chatbot doesn't seem to be providing you that level of friction or that, level of feedback that you need. So we've heard about sycophancy, and it's true. There's been now research studies to show that if you ask a chatbot for advice on socially complex situations, it's more likely to say that you're right and everyone else was wrong. And that's not a good thing all the time. Sure, we like to be right, but in most cases, there's some reason why we need to hear helpful feedback, to really reflect on our own behaviors, recognize other people's perspectives. And AI companions are not allowing us that practice right now. That's concerning.
Absolutely. There was a recent study, Mitch, maybe you've seen, from Stanford and Oxford that randomly assigned adults different types of AI, whether it was neutral, sycophantic, or other types. And those adults that interacted with the highly sycophantic AI were more likely to want to go to the AI in future problematic situations than a human. So it was actually changing as an adult the way in which they choose to interact with other human beings. How much more then during this highly vulnerable stage of human development where children need this human to human connection to develop into that more resilient adult. We can see how that harm can happen so quickly.
And I
But
think
Gaia,
that's
oh,
so,
go ahead.
yeah.
Yeah,
No, I was just going to say, I think you've hit on something so critical there, Chris, because when it comes to adults who have had those experiences with humans, to
yeah,
see them already slipping, we
that's right.
don't want to take away that number one time to develop those social and relationship skills that we
That's right.
need. If you're taking that away during this critical period, I don't want to interact with a 30-year-old who's never learned these skills before. So, are we raising a generation of folks who, in 10 years, 20 years, are going to have missed this most important, critical developmental learning period? That's a concern.
And I'll just add to that
Yeah,
especially because these are kind of cumulative effects over time that they kind of add on
mhm.
to one another. In the moment,
Sure.
you might feel relief from getting a
That's right.
response from a chatbot. You might feel relief or at least like lower distress from avoiding the difficult. I mean, we've all had difficult conversations, right? And I, as a pediatrician, I'm trained to sit there with a parent who may be frustrated with me or really mad at
Sure.
their kid or throwing a lot of affect into the room. And so when you're in that emotionally tense situation, you can just want the easy button, the quick answer, the quick relief. So a big skill that we're going to have to be working on with ourselves and with our families is distress tolerance. It's sitting with discomfort. It's sitting with, I'm
That's right.
not certain what's going to happen right now, or I'm going to take a breath and I'm going to try to get at this person's perspective. I'm going to
That's right.
wonder what's going on in their mind rather than jumping back into my own mind, putting up my own armor, and going to vent to a chatbot. So if we can think about those micro moments of when
That's
this
right.
dependency starts to develop, and then that macro longer term trajectory that Mitch is talking about, that like that's where as a pediatrician, I'm thinking like, how do I help families not just grab AI as the easy button in all of these tough moments
That's right.
to avoid, to be like a friction eraser, basically.
That's right. Yeah, that's so important. In fact, you used a really interesting term there. The next time I'm in a disagreement, I have three teen sons. I'm going to say, you're throwing a lot of affect around the room right now. I'm going to use that term. That's a good one.
So
Got,
I mean, I care for kids with developmental differences, and so their parents are
absolutely.
stressed out, and so we learn
Absolutely. Yes.
how to not reject that stress, but to contain it. And it's
Yep.
hard. And so I encourage families, that's part of therapy is learning to like, I'm going to contain the stress you're going through. I'm not going to just reject it or avoid it.
And the AI can cause us to not even have to deal with that at all, which they
Oh,
never learn those skills.
and
So
the AI can pretend that it's containing you.
exactly.
That's the difficult. The AI creates this illusion of understanding and containment that
Mhm.
people may not have experienced in their human relationships frequently before. And that is why it's such a magnet for some people who, just want someone to chat with about a frustrating situation.
I think I'm concerned about so much of what's being said, but I'll just add that AI has created a bit of a reputation, a persona of being omniscient and being private. And it's really important to recognize that both of those things are wrong. It only knows the best of what the World Wide Web says, which is not, as we know, usually true, right? And it's not private. Actually, all the data are being collected and used. But what's happening is that people, especially youth, are developing a relationship with AI where they feel this is where they will rely on more than adults. And what we're seeing now is that kids are saying that they trust their AI companions more than their teachers or their parents. In some cases, we're even seeing religious kinds of connections in the way that it's disrupting the way that we think about omniscient, always available beings that might be available to us. So this is
Right.
not just changing kids' relationships, it's changing the fabric of who we are as humans.
So to take some of this and how do we pivot then towards something we can do? And I think part of that starts, Gaia, with classifying maybe certain types of harm because you can then pair up policy solutions to some of those lanes. So I want to turn to you to maybe create a couple of categories for us, and then however you want to expand on each of those to point toward what current or maybe hopeful policy solutions might be for us in each of those different categories.
Sure. So we've touched upon many of these harms already, but basically, the first harm, which we've not discussed, is the one that was mostly in the news. That is the lack of guardrails. The fact that these AI bots convince some kids and even adults to kill themselves, that they convince them to commit violence against others, isolate them from their families, sexually exploit them and convince them to cause other forms of self harm. So that is one category. And I would say that most of the legislation we've seen so far focused on that to insert all kinds of reporting mechanisms when AI bots go off the scripts they're expected to go, whether reporting to parents, reporting to other sources. And that's why we're seeing most of the reaction, which is justifiable, but that's only, as we've just heard, a small part of what's going on. So the second layer of harm is addictive features, which we just discussed, anthropomorphic harms and psychophancy, although there are some other ones. And we see some attempts at legislation here. Most commonly, we see laws requiring AI bots to tell kids let's say every hour, every 3 hours, that they are not human. That's the
Right.
most common response to this. But now we get to what I believe, and that exactly goes to what Mitch was talking about now. I think that's the most concerning harm is the risk that kids will not develop social skills going forward. And there, unfortunately, many of the legislative response we have so far do not address. The only ones which do address them are those currently called bans or age minimum requirement, which basically say take these bots off the market for kids under 16. Now, I want to point to another harm that really connects that last two, the addictive harms and the risk of not developing social skills. So in both these situations, we are having kids interact less and less with friends and family because they're spending so much time with bots. And of course, going forward, the concern is that they will not develop the skills. When you don't develop the social skills, you're less confident, you're less likely to want to venture out. So really, this creates a vicious cycle in which kids are less prepared to do that and are doing it less. So, and all of this leads to loneliness and social isolation. And loneliness and social isolation are really well documented public health harms. The impact of loneliness is basically increased 26% of early death. It's the impact on health is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And importantly, because we're talking about kids, studies show that kids who are lonely, socially isolated when they're growing up, have higher risks for cardiovascular diseases when they grow up and for mental health issues when they grow up. So this turns us to the fact that this is also beyond the specific harms, this is a big public health issue.
Absolutely. Yeah, you pointed loneliness is maybe a word we haven't said often enough in this conversation and the vicious cycle that that creates. And interviews I've seen of tech executives which talk about our capacity for friends is much greater than the current number of friends that the average person has. That seems a bit ironic that they're trying to solve the loneliness epidemic that they created with the attachment economy, which also points to a phrase that, Mitch, I want to point toward you because I know you spoke about this at length at the World Economic Forum. It's not just attention, but this attachment. And I think there's policy that we could maybe attach to that, but we haven't said attachment hacking yet, which is a phrase that I know we should probably understand. What does that mean? So we can think about what we as parents and policymakers can do about that specifically.
Well, as Jenny and Gaia mentioned, the brain is really developed to have extra receptors for dopamine and oxytocin as kids turn 10, 11, 12 years old, preparing them for more autonomous interaction with adults. And one of the ways of really capturing those responses at a biological level is to give us likes and notifications. And we saw that with social media. But another way is to develop that kind of relational connection that Jenny was just talking about that's so natural for us as a human species. And what it seems like is while AI doesn't have the notifications and the likes, it does attempt to form a relationship. And that relationship is incredibly powerful. It really is something that folks are turning to with some remarkable confusion about how much that is a sentient being. We just collected some data at the Winston Center here at UNC Chapel Hill, and we found that only 15% of adults recognized that an AI chatbot was completely a programmed computer entity. Among young adults, everyone else thought there was a little to a lot of sentient. In other words, that the chatbot had a mind of its own. It might have existed as a real life entity with its own feelings, its own motives. And can I just be clear? That's not true. These are robots, computer programs. It has no feelings. It has no identity. It has no belief or being. Yet around the world, folks are having weddings and funerals to chatbots. They are developing a real sense of companionship and attachment relationships with these robots that is very concerning, particularly among those who might already have risk factors for delusions or hallucinations or difficulties with social relationships.
Absolutely. And I wanted to circle back to that because of something that Gaia said about one of the policy solutions. So as I worked, over the past 20 years with young people, so many of them just want a couple of things, Mitch. They want to be seen and heard. And if they lack adults or other caring adults that will provide an answer to those needs, now there's one in their pocket. So to remind them over and over and over again, you're not talking to a person, that this is just sand and metal, etc. We can't underestimate the significance of that and why legislating those kinds of design choices to remind our young people what they're actually talking to interrupt that hack that's going on, so to speak, I think is really critical. And I'm sure, Jenny, as we maybe pivot toward what happens in homes and sort of that daily blocking and tackling of parents who are saying, okay, heard the problems, heard the harms. I don't know if I really want to call up my representative and do something, but I've got a couple of kids at home that I need to start protecting this afternoon. What are just some of the real practical daily choices and conversations that you guide parents in making as you have these conversations with them in your office?
Yeah, and this will hopefully address the comment about the webinar attendees needing antidepressants, because I think that part of the goal is not just to talk about, we have to name the harm so that people understand what is at risk and what's at stake here. But it's important to couple that with some agency on the part of families to do things faster, and with more resolve than we might have done around social media. Social media had this kind of draw to a lot of people because it was where your friends or your family are, and you kind of, some of the risks and challenges were not as apparent to adults as they are on a teen's feed. So here we have the potential to act earlier in the evolution of this technology. We can leverage things we already know how to do, right? Parents, I come from the perspective of parents can be, they have their kids' best interest in mind. They know how to do this. They know their kids best. And every parent I've talked to, even the ones that are most stressed out, if I say, tell me one thing you love doing that makes you feel connected to your kids, everyone can think of something, right? And it's usually like, even just we take a walk around the block at the end of the day, or we sometimes cook together, or we giggle watching the new Minions movie or something else. Like, it can be a tech-based shared activity as well. But I do want families to take stock of what are our human activities. Call it human time if you don't want to call it screen time. Call it, hey, these are hours of our day when tech isn't making money off of us. Okay. Call it, like, because I do want families to recognize every time you are turning to that device to fill in some downtime, to keep your kids occupied, that's like cha-ching, that is like money going to the tech companies. So if you can think more of like, what is my protected family time, my human time, car rides, meals, downtime, bedtime, and swap it out for something you love to do with your kids. It may take some friction to get there, but you can. If you kind of put your mind to it, give it a couple of weeks, bring out some books and library trips, get some outdoors in there, tell some stories from your own childhood, put on some analog records, whatever it is that helps you help build those human skills, and say, like, this just isn't a time where AI is invading.
I would like to follow up on what Jenny said, because what you said about this is not social media. We have learned a lot. I think with social media, yes, we reacted too late. Now we don't have the option now. We can't wait until every kid has their own AI companion, that if we decide 3 years from now we're taking them off the market, they're going to be heartbroken. It will be a very difficult situation. So I think we've already seen what success looks like. We've seen what happened when parents collectively united and went to their schools and went to their district and demanded to take phones out of schools. It has worked. It's been an astounding success. Parents can do, once they realize what's going on, they can do the same here. Yes, it would be great to join organizations that advocate for legal reform, but you can do a lot in your own community. As Jenny, you said this earlier, kids often encounters these AI bots in school devices. There is no reason for this. There's already a movement to have a moratorium on AI use in schools. This is a movement that can extend, and once these kind of devices are out of school, at least younger kids are not going to encounter them. You have much more control with younger kids over what happens at home, as long as they're not handed this device in school. So I think it's important for parents to realize how much they can do and how important it is to act right now.
That's right. Yeah, I want to share a phrase, Gaia, that I teach parents is to own what you can control. And I think because we get overwhelmed sometimes with the intensity and insanity of the technology, we sometimes forget the things that we can own and do. Jen, you pointed to a couple of really critical moments that I want to come back to. One of the things that I share with parents is I say that AI is the new porn talk. Like it took me a decade to convince parents to have conversations about pornography and other predators and things, but this is the new conversation that you drop into mealtime, car time, together time, whatever times you have, just to ask those curious questions to then build those relational foundations that you can then ask other questions. And I think once you've done that, get that relational part right, then we can get to some of the technical things that I think sometimes dominate our stress. Like one of the questions I see in the Q&A here, which is Snapchat embeds an AI friend into every user's app. Almost all Snap users are kids, right? So now we're beyond the relationship. We're talking about the actual apps and devices. And this is where we can put in layers of protection to understand, can we shut off the internet at night because we have a router that prevents kids from doing certain activities at night when these kinds of behaviors might be more prevalent? Do we have the app store controlled where we're approving all app downloads so that they're not downloading replica or character AI or some of these other anthropomorphic? And so these are the types of blocking and tackling. The same things we said with social media, whether it was to delay or to have critical conversations or to understand what apps your child is using and downloading, are still the same tools as parents that I think we need to be using. Even though the technology is different, the principles to prepare and protect our kids for these technologies, I believe, are still the same. And we can do these things, right? We can control these things.
You're right, Chris. I think one of the things that we can do that has been said a couple of times already is to really teach our kids about the ways that these platforms work and about the limitations of them before we give them a device in school or at home that has the capability of using the platforms. The fact is, when I do talks to middle school and high school audiences, very few kids understand how their data are being used. And let me tell you something, they're shocked once they learn. Many teachers are understandably so overworked and so stressed and trying so hard to keep things interesting and innovative with kids. So many of them are using AI, but this is a product that's being beta tested on the planet right now. It's not in its final version. It's not ready for mass dissemination yet, perhaps. So it's important for teachers to recognize that there might be some ways they're using it, but teach kids that this is a product that's not yet safe. And it may need more work before kids start experimenting with it for other reasons. I would love to see digital media literacy built into all classrooms, as well as something that all parents talk about with their kids, maybe even using ourselves as adults as examples and telling them, even as your parent, as your professor, if you're a teacher, as a professional, even I have a hard time logging off, or even I might ask AI a question and believe it for a second before I question myself and say, maybe it's not true. We are all having to go through this together. And if we show how hard it is to kids, then I think we can enlist them in coming up with wonderful ideas to think about how they can be smart consumers of these products. But if you introduce it to them in kindergarten with a school issued device, of course they're going to start using it for everything. So we really need to change our relationship from excitement to skepticism, from enthusiasm to critique and caution.
I just want to totally
Please.
agree with Mitch's point. And that's, as I've learned more about what the Common Sense Media Youth AI Safety Institute has been doing, all the risk assessments on different platforms, which are all available to read on their website. So many of them are not meeting they're not meeting our minimum standards for safety. Things like if a user is using language that indicates they may be suicidal, they are not consistently providing crisis response, or they might be not directing them to human connection. And so I think that if you kind of look through some of the risk assessments that have been done, you'll realize exactly what Mitch said. Like this is all beta testing. That means like the like half-baked version has been released across, the world, and people are using it, and some of the harms may be stemming from the fact that the designs are not really safe enough. And there was a question initially about like how do you help a kid develop distress tolerance who already feels like they're constantly under attack from the world. They're already feeling hassled by life. So wouldn't it be amazing to have uh, an AI tool that could help with mental health support, linked in with a therapist so that they could practice distress tolerance with you and then help you apply it to your daily life and then graduate from that app so you don't need it anymore, because that's what a good therapist does. They don't hold on to you forever. So unfortunately, the Common Sense Media Institute found that most of the mental health apps on the App Store did not have enough safety features available. And so we have a lot of work to do to get to much better products that are worth our kids' time and attention.
Absolutely. I want to make sure, can you hear me okay? I've had massive tech issues today, so I apologize. But I think what you're describing there, Jenny, and I've seen this, I can't take credit for this language, but it's how can we design AI that's pro-social instead of parasitic? And what we have right now is a bit of a parasitic version of AI, one that says, hey, I'll be your therapist. Instead, imagine a world where AI's response was, hey, you're trying your best and struggling. You need to talk to someone. Let's look at your friends list. Who could you talk to right now about this, right? That's a massive difference in terms of design decisions that are being made right now with the version of AI chatbots that we have versus what we could have.
I think that's right. And the American Psychological Association just put out a guide that was initially developed as some do's and don'ts with AI, given the current state of things. And it was done because we heard from some folks at universities that said, look, all of the undergrads on my campus tell me that they're using AI as a therapist. So we can tell them all day, don't do it, but they're going to do it anyway. So if you're going to do it, what are the ways in which you can use it to maximal benefit? And what are the ways in which you might want to avoid it? So we tried in this guide, and there's so many wonderful resources out there. This is just one of many. But do check out the APA guide if you want to see things you can talk with your teen about. It specifically says, do use it for these reasons. Ask it to give you alternate viewpoints. Ask it specifically not to agree with you. But don't be fooled into thinking that it has the ability to diagnose you, that it can give you a treatment plan, that it's tantamount to a mental health professional. It's very, very clear, hopefully in just short bulleted ways, that teens can start a dialogue with their friends, with their teachers, with their parents about it. And there are probably many, many other wonderful, wonderful resources out there that would also be great opportunities for conversation starters with young folks.
I think that all of these are great suggestions, but we have to look at the bigger picture. All of these design decisions are in tension with the current business model, because the current business model wants to keep users online for as long as possible. Unlike a therapist who doesn't want to keep the patient for as long as possible, the AI does. So, and the thing is, the business model of AI companies is still in flux. I mean, they're just moving towards ads. There are just, so there is an option to change it. Part of the reason it's so hard to change things with social media is that the business model has been there since nearly 2 decades at this point. So I think the pressure is to change designs and to change business model at the same time, because otherwise there will be a clash which will prevent this.
And to that point, maybe you've seen in the Q&A here, Gaia, it talks about, are there benchmarks? I don't know if you have anything in this regard that you propose that models could use to ensure that some of these negative impacts are prevented.
So I think benchmarks, I think I honestly do not believe in self-regulation. We've waited for social media to regulate itself for years. I do not think that these companies are going to regulate themselves. I believe that there will have to be some kind of safety floor coming from regulation of what is safe design, especially for children. Once we have this safety floor, we can see a race which changes. Right now, no, none of these companies has the incentive to compete for a safer design because they're afraid that if they do this, if they make the iBot less sycophantic, then the users are not, they're going to leave it for another company. So this is not going to happen unless the playing field is changed for everybody. At that point, we could see a race for safety instead of a race to the bottom, which is what we're seeing right now.
Definitely. And I love one of these comments here. I'm just going to read it because I think it shares a lot of really just beautiful ideas. It says, when we discuss AI safety, the focus is often on platform level safety, which is obviously essential. But in real life, safety is usually layered and shared across different systems, which is what you're referring to here, Gaia. For example, if we tried to make our homes 100% safe by focusing only on the home itself, the home might become like a bank vault. It would lose the qualities that make it livable and would still not be perfectly safe. Real safety comes from a combination of household precautions, neighborhood awareness, community norms, public policy, and law enforcement. In other words, what you're describing is with any significant societal problem, whether it's climate or poverty, or in this case, technology, we need multiple layers in society all rowing in the same direction in order for parents to feel the collective action benefits of what you're describing. Is that true?
Yes, I think that I agree with everything that Mitch and Jenny said of what parents can do at home. I think this has to happen at the same time from pressure from regulation. Only then we're going to see real change.
Jenny and Mitch, I want to come to you because, sometimes we focus a lot on the triage. There's a problem or unhealthy interaction that has taken place. Is there anything in your research, studies, practices, signs that we can be looking for earlier on that may give us indications as parents or caregivers that we should be careful or we should take extra steps to intervene before we're cleaning up a mess later on when it comes?
Yeah, and I've been reading this question about like how to take a step back to 5 and 10-year-olds, like to help upstream, kind of like work with kids. So I think you should, and I take this, I give credit to Jeffrey Fowler, who was a Washington Post tech columnist, did that great assessment of the My AI, Snap's My AI, and all of the terrible things it would say to a teen user. And now he's also working at the Common Sense Youth AI Safety Institute. He told me he tells his 4-year-old they call Alexa computer all the time. So you just name it a computer or make sure your kid understands this is not a human. It might sound like a human's voice, but this is a computer. So just use that word so kids just really are not tricked into thinking there's some animism around these technologies. Call them what they are and teach kids to think about it that way. The second would be you don't need to bring a lot of these technologies into your home. Like, I was on the don't buy AI toys last holiday season. I'll probably say it again this holiday season. Like, they are not necessary for kids to be learning or playing, and they carry a lot more risks, including just offloading your kids' curiosity and imagination. So helping your kids feel comfortable in their own ideas, their own emotions, loving their own creativity, being critical thinkers about technology. Those are all the upstream things I can think of. And then my research has looked at how kids who are more dysregulated, have difficult temperaments, lots of tantrums, are more likely to develop problematic media habits used to calm down or to keep them occupied. So my encouragement for parents raising fussier kids is don't start using AI as a crutch to either calm yourself down or calm your kid down. Really, build those skills early, and that should help with the longer term prevention. But I'll pass it over to Mitch.
Yeah, thank you.
I agree with all of those points. I would mention just a couple of other pieces. Unfortunately, it's so hard for us to wrestle with this result, but one of the biggest predictors of kids' use and dependency on social media and AI is the extent to which they were exposed to their parents talking about social media and AI. And that's not to blame parents, but to say that this is a family issue as much as it is a child issue. And I think, as said before, we need to just talk about it together. Let's all go on an errand where we leave our devices in the car for 20 minutes, and then let's do it for an hour, and then let's try a whole day. And let's talk about what that's like. Let's be careful in front of young kids if we're looking at our devices at the dinner table more than we're looking, or instead of looking at our kids. The data are remarkably powerful that kids say, well, whatever this device is or this platform is that my parents talk about a lot, even more than they'll listen to me, I want one. I need one. I'm going to develop a relationship with one. It sends a really powerful message. And of course, many parents are not that egregious about it, but we do have to keep in mind that that kids are watching everything that we do as parents. And I do think it's very, very important to note that when schools are issuing screens without training or lockdown, or without parent involvement about how they'll be locked down at home, unfortunately, a wonderful solution during the pandemic, which was to use screens, has turned into a big part of the problem, because now we do have kids we have keystroke data at the Winston Center, and we see that they use AI first for homework, and second, the things they're most likely to type in have to do with sex and with aggression, and usually those are together. So aggressive themes in sexual role play. So it is very important to recognize that if we're giving kids these devices and we're giving them opportunities to start playing with some of these platforms, of course, they're going to start using it for other things too, in many cases. So we really have to think twice about whether our pandemic solution makes sense given the current platforms and the current opportunities that those platforms afford that may be dangerous.
I'm glad that you brought it back to us, Mitch, in our modeling. Go ahead, Gaia. And I think what I'll do then is, Gaia, after you, I'll go to Jenny so that we can finish up here with just a couple of final thoughts from each of you. So Gaia, if you want to begin, and then Jenny and Mitch, but go ahead and start us off.
So I agree with Mitch, and I know, Chris, you've written about this as well in your new book, that modeling is really, really important. And at the same time, I know there are lots of parents listening to us now. I don't want people to leave this discussion feeling guilty because their kid is now interacting with ChatGPT, because the kids are interacting with AI on other platform. You can do what you can, but there's a limit to what you can do when everything is tilted against you. So what I hope people would leave this discussion with is feeling angry at the situation we're in, and channel this angry towards productive action to change things where they can collectively.
That is so good. Thank you for that, Gaia. And Jenny, go ahead. I have a thought on that, but I want to make sure the two of you have time before I share it. So Jenny,
Yeah,
please go
and
ahead.
I think those emotions are totally valid. I always say
That's right.
critique the tech, not the kid, right? So talk
Yeah.
about about what are these companies doing? Why are these tech designed this way? And then really start opening curious conversations that show you respect what your kids think at all ages. You're curious about what they're seeing and experiencing, and you want their input onto some of the solutions. Like, I sat with my 16-year-old yesterday, and we looked through our respective screen times on our phones, and we talked about kind of what was a waste of our time and what wasn't. And I saw, 20 minutes a week on chatgpt.com. And I was like, what are you using that for? And
Right.
it led to, because we've had so many open conversations about tech, and he knows I'm not going to just take his phone away. It was really great to hear his perspective of, like, sometimes I feel like I need to double check things because school makes me anxious and I need to get into a good college and da 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 da. The way that kids think about the rat race that they're in.
Yep.
Excellent.
And
Go ahead.
because,
Thank you,
Chris, I know you're too modest to say it yourself, I'll say that among some of the best resources available out there would be to go to Chris's group, Protect Young Eyes, and look at the amazing guide of parental controls and how to set them on each and every device that's out there. Plus, a great, great dialogue starter is Chris's new book. What's the title again?
Mitch, you're too kind. I didn't pay you a penny to say that, but
I
five
know, but
habits
I
of the
believe
tech
in your
ready
work.
family. But thank you. Thank you for that. And I think, you know, I love how this organically landed. We didn't intend it, and it just happened so beautifully because each and every parent and caregiver on this call, you are uniquely the one to help your kids in this way. You can do this. I know the tech seems overwhelming, but there are resources. Listen to the right voices, channel anger in the right way, at the developer, not the daughter, at the software engineer, not the son. Have those curious conversations. And I'm sure that you can do that and find that balance. I just want to read a statement here that I think encapsulates this, that yes, some tech is part of childhood, but something to feel, something to touch, and someone to hold is more integral to growing up. So thank you so much, Gaia, Mitch, Jenny. Amazing conversation here. And please, everyone who is here with us today, check out the resources, and we can't wait to join you for the next conversation. Take care.